Two Live crew went on trial in Fort Lauderdale, Florida on Tuesday, charged with singing obscene songs for paying adults during a nightclub performance last June. The jury consisted of 5 white members, 1 black. So far, by their own admission, their main problem has been stifling fits of laughter. First, it was learned that a police recording of the offending performance had been made on a tiny micro-cassette recorder placed inside a briefcase. When prosecutors attempted to submit a policeman's handwritten transcription of what he thought he heard on that very garbled tape, Judge June Johnson turned them down, leaving defense attorneys flushed with potential victory.
These gays, they're trying to murder me.
What do I think of her?
Yes?
I don't think of her.
Goodbye. I'm off. Write about that in the New York fucking Post.
Hello.
Back to pop music that fucks.
Here on Eating for Free, the podcast recording live from the absolute edge of the internet. You ruined my intro, and that's fine.
Did I?
Yes.
You can still do it right now. It's been
just
15 seconds.
like Bill Clinton ruined the 90s. You ruined my intro to pop music that fucks, and it's fine.
I think you're going to say
It's
like Tipper
fine.
Gore ruined the last half of the 20th century.
That's also true, but ultimately we know the real menace.
Men.
No, the fact
Oh.
that Samantha isn't on Sex and the City anymore. Hi, everyone. My name's the local gossip, Joan Summers.
And this is your local artisan, Matthew Lawson.
And we're back, like we said, with pop music that fucks, a oral history of outrage. And we're here with part 3. So we have been putting this episode off for 2 weeks now because, one, we needed a little bit of time to, get it done. It's been a lot of research. Thankfully, this episode is a little bit lighter, I feel. Lighter in terms
Less
of
scholarly articles to
less
cite. Yes.
scholarly articles to cite. We have a little bit more of a focused episode.
It is
this
definitely
week.
more focused, yeah.
My original vision for this episode got scaled back a little bit because I found just a really interesting story that is super applicable to really the news, I feel like, literally right now. And again, I'm building this theme of like history, obviously not the first person to say this, repeating itself. And I found a lot of comfort in putting it together the way that it turned out. So I'm really excited about this episode. But I want to start with an anecdote that I think is going to take us places.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry for what I'm about to do.
Oh, no. What?
But, we've been sitting with this for like 3 weeks now, right? Like, I mean, not just this episode, but the series. We've been running it for almost we ran it for the entirety of February.
It's about to be a month almost, really.
Yeah, and it's going to be many parts. We're spreading them out because, wall of text is never appreciated, especially from your friends.
Definitely
here on Eating
not.
for Free. But, I've been revisiting a lot of classics in my life. I've been experiencing new classics.
Music-wise? Or
Just not even
discourse-wise?
music-wise. Not even discourse, like just art, music, culture,
Yeah.
TV, film, that kind of thing. Like
Media.
media.
large.
And it's funny that we're talking about the 90s this week because I am back on my bullshit of rewatching Sex and the City for
Oh my God,
maybe... Okay, shut the fuck up.
I'm about to start it.
Shut the fuck up.
I was about to
Shut the
tell
fuck
you.
up. Don't steal valor.
What
on this.
valor?
Okay.
Don't think she owns
When
television.
I say...
She starts the show and she's
when
like, I own this
say-
show. Anyone who
when
watches
I
it is
say-
inspired by me.
When I say I'm restarting Sex and the City, I'm talking about it like I can word for word quote
That's
entire
true, yeah.
episodes from front to back with detailed descriptions of the designers everyone was wearing, including in what scenes, because I've truly seen it like 100 times now. That's me when I say it. You don't get to claim mood.
I'm not
for
claiming.
rewatching
I didn't
Sex
even
and the
say
City.
mood.
Yes, you did. You instinctively said, "If rewind the tapes, rewind the tapes."
We'll
Me
not be
too.
doing that.
Rewind the tapes. But I've been rewatching it because it is truly a comfort show in times of extreme depression and mania. It really it's
Did you already go through all of Curb
it's
again?
like it's a salve. Well, no, Curb is like always there, right? Like
That's true.
Curb is like Curb is to me what other people do with Friends, where they just like put on whatever episode, and
our
it's just
Friends,
like
our version
Curb.
of The Office,
All
yeah.
of Curb is like a non-linear space.
That's true.
It's just
It is a liminal space of comedy.
when I was going to call her a not nice word, but you know when that lady on TikTok talks about Flatland and like 2D spaces? Like, that's where
Me and Kenny were just having a conversation
that's where
about
Larry
that.
David exists to me in just like a 2D
What if I turn the
space.
melon inside out?
Like he doesn't
If I
exist
turned
on
your
our
hat
dimension,
in the fourth
and
dimension.
he's always been Larry David, and all things are always happening all the time to Larry David. So like,
That's true.
You could go from season 2, episode 13 to season 10, episode 4, and like nothing has changed.
It is like the
since.
most consistent show, honestly.
But no.
But with Sex and the
City, it's like you gotta watch it. You know, you can kind of do like a remix playlist where you can just like shuffle the episodes. Truly.
Well, if you've seen them like a million times,
But no. It's one of those things that is truly everlasting in my life. But anyways, the reason why I'm bringing it up is I've been watching it from the beginning again, and there's like, for the most part, nothing new to be said about Sex and the City. But I was watching it in the lead up to rewatching for now the second time and Just Like That, which is the sequel to Sex and the City. Because the second season is on the horizon. And there's something that I've just am struck by on this particular rewatch that is always omnipresent when you watch Sex and the City, especially as like a queer person or just like a woman of being insane experience. Like as someone who does and always has for my entire life deeply related to Carrie Bradshaw and also been accused of everyone in my life of being the Carrie Bradshaw of my own life.
That tracks.
I just deeply relate to it. Obviously not the first person, not the last person. There's millions of others like me. I'm struck by, especially for it coming out in the 90s and now comparing it to what we talk about, not just in this episode, but larger cultural forces that predated it and were a backdrop to a lot of it, and how revolutionary it was alongside shows like Girlfriends at the same time. Is just that like there was a period of time, and I don't want to say TV was like not chaste and fun and raw, and then it became chaste and not fun and not raw. Like that's not what I'm trying to say. And I think in many ways reality TV kind of took over the place that things like Sex and the City did in broader culture. But like there's just like something about every single episode of Sex and the City that you just want to like grab onto and like hold onto, and makes you feel so alive. Like there are so many parts of Sex and the City where like Carrie will like just rip a cig after giving the most killer monologue and like getting fucked
Like,
raw.
that's television.
And like Charlotte, you know, will be going through her bullshit. You know, Miranda will like fall and like throw her back out naked on her bathroom floor, excuse me. But like there's just something so human and like animalistic almost about Sex and the City that I feel like art and culture severely lacks now. Like
I can see what you
it's
mean.
not that it doesn't exist, and it's not that people aren't making like good art or like real art,
But it does feel like a bit more spare. Or especially with how
times-
much content we're making now. It's
in
like
times of like extreme religious persecution, meaning like religious people persecuting us, and also like extreme like cultural repression, you can see like art regress in a lot of ways. And I'm only talking
it's like a
about
pendulum swinging.
yeah,
as
it
usual.
doesn't like happen all the time, but I also think a lot of it has been algorithms dictating like what gets made, and like a lot of the human element of TV being removed from it, and also the frivolity and like the need to not always be the highest rated show on television to survive, like has been lost. And so it's just weird now going back to this era and like listening to this music and like listening to different books and reading so much and consuming art like Sex and the City, which famously took place for a significant chunk in the 90s. Like Carrie Bradshaw is like the quintessential 90s TV woman. It's just weird to go back and not sound like my parents in many ways, but remind myself of my parents of being like, it's just not the same anymore.
The classic, you couldn't make this today kind of thing.
No, you really couldn't. But
Yeah.
like watching Sex and the City, part of I think of its enduring appeal is like you literally cannot make that show anymore.
Yeah.
Like if you actually go back, imagine a single one of those episodes like being on TV. I'm not saying Girls was perfect or like necessarily good by everyone's metric, but I don't even think you could
that's
make
different as well.
No, but I'm saying I don't even think you can make Girls now.
No.
And it was
no.
I mean, it was popular, but like its cultural legacy is one that people revile. And so like I just think TV just is never going to be the same again, especially with the Netflixification of everything and the algorithm of everything. Like,
I mean, even now I'm watching for the first time all the way through because I didn't actually watch all first 2 seasons, but Twin Peaks. And that's of course like soap opera Lynchian, whatever. But the amount of times I watch that and I'm just like, the episodic nature and like captivation that comes from that content is so lost today. I think they were saying on this on InfoWars, and shout out to them because truly they summarized it so well. Netflix television or like a lot of media today does truly feel so like fleeting. You watch it and you might even love it and are obsessed with it. And then all of a sudden you finish it in 2 days and you forget it even existed. And you don't care, and you don't think about it later on.
It's
Meanwhile,
like
I'm watching
everything is
episodes
made
of-
by computers now.
Yeah.
Like not by computers literally, but like the
Soon,
the
they're
human,
trying.
the human spirit out of everything
Yeah.
has been like evaporated. And what I
the
really,
craft feels lost.
yeah, and I think what I want to talk about, we'll talk about a little bit in this episode because it really does touch on this in many ways, but through the lens of music. And what we've been kind of talking about throughout this series is I think 2 things can be true, right? Like we can live through periods where extreme religious crackdowns on politics and art coincide usually with times of usually extreme social upheaval or
definitely.
amid like war and changing social structures, right? Like as the world around us devolves into chaos, we as a society, American society, tends to crack down on ourselves, right? Our anxieties are heightened. We become fearful and afraid and repressed.
Well, art is the mirror of
in
the
many
world,
ways.
et cetera, et cetera.
But also the very systems of capitalism and how capitalism has taken over art completely.
Who can make art? How can you make it? How do you distribute it?
I'm not saying real art doesn't exist anymore, but
Of
I'm
course
saying
not.
that if you have art that is seen by literally anybody now, it is like probably through a prism of absolute bullshit. And a lot of it you see in this episode and the last episode of particular of like the regulation of art in many ways and the politicization of art and how capital influences in many ways what kind of art we get to see. And oftentimes even when it works in tandem with other artists against, say, religious oppression, it still isn't necessarily like fostering a healthy artistic environment, right?
Yeah.
Like Spotify is probably, I'm just like using this as an example, would probably not bow to pressure to like remove all the explicit albums off of Spotify, right?
No.
But that doesn't mean Spotify is like a champion of artists. And I think you really see,
I see what you mean.
I think you see that tension in today's
Well,
episode.
it's like tolerance versus like actual, like community or fostering or encouragement. It's very different.
So this episode in particular, we are going to be talking about, for most of it, a trial that took place in the early 1990s involving 2 Live Crew. And then through that, what happens with both rap music and then more broadly, the music industry as it relates to obscenity.
Yeah, and censorship. And
we talk in many ways at the last couple episodes about, especially in the first one, if you go back and you listen, you hear about how in a lot of ways, the kind of music we hear now is not only directly as a result of Black musicians, but also as a direct result of racist backlash against the prominence and popularity of Black musicians, that there is an inherent tension that has existed as long as the United States has existed. And as Black musicians started to gain popularity and be heard on radios, that white record labels and white DJs and radio stations became not only incensed, but capitalized on that, put white artists in those spaces. And like there has been this just eternal battle against those 2 concepts, like as long as the modern Billboard chart has existed. So I'm actually going to start with a piece that I think will bridge what happens in this episode with what happened in our very first episode. So, February 2nd, in the Washington Post, it's called The Long Rush to Judgment. The year is 1994. So remember that. The year is 1994.
Mm-hmm.
Torn from the headlines. A Billboard editorial titled "Control the Dimwits" criticizes sexually explicit records by Black artists and urges the music industry to control itself lest someone else do it. Radio stations announce that they will no longer air records considered offensive. A Washout the Air committee assembles a list of objectionable records if it wants banned from the air and threatens to file complaints with the FCC if they are played. Record distributors say they will stop carrying suggestive albums and have, in fact, already started screening records. A major New York radio station sends a warning to record labels urging them to cut blue material and criticizes the industry for supporting filth passing under the guise of pop lyrics. Is rap under attack in 1994? Actually, no. The target was rhythm and blues, and the year was 1954. The outcry 40 years ago was against R&B's poor quality and obscene content. What one critic dubbed pornophony, later stereo pornophony. Later songs included such double entendre classics as Hank Ballard and the Midnighters' Work With Me, Annie, The Dominoes' 60-Minute Man, The Drifters' Honey Love, Roy Brown's Good Rockin' Tonight, and Bull Moose Jackson's Big 10-Inch and I Want a Bow-Legged Woman. Almost everything reported about R&B in the mid-1950s provokes a sense of déjà vu. That's true even in the mandatory rating system proposed at last week's hearing on negative rap music before the House Consumer Protection Subcommittee, and likely to surface again at next week's Senate hearing on quote-unquote gangster rap, called by Representative Cardiff Collins, Democrat in Illinois, and Senator Herb Kohl, Democrat in Wisconsin. Collins will hold no further hearings in March and April on the effects of gangster rap lyrics as judged by African American psychiatrists, educators, ministers, and cultural historians. 15 years before the Parent Music Resource Center and the National PTA made a similar suggestion in 1985 and subsequently backed off when the record industry came up with its voluntary parental guidance sticker, one major broadcaster, Gordon McLendon, suggested ratings for each presumably objectionable song. D for drugs, S for sex, L for language, G for general, with subcategories for records that were acceptable, A, marginal, M, and unacceptable, X. The broadcaster also recommended a committee of hopefully former prostitutes and junkies to screen subjective lyrics for teen slang that seemed to change every week. This was 2 years before the Motion Picture Association of America's rating system was instituted, but a similar system for the music industry has moved beyond the frustration stage, such as when Jesse Jackson proposed ethics review boards in major radio markets. As for the other headlines, here are a list of corollaries and connections. Last December, Billboard ran another editorial, this one titled "Culture, Violence, and the Cult of the Unrepentant Rogue," declaring that, quote, "No form of popular music is important enough to justify or excuse racism, sexual bigotry, and the endorsement of sociopathic violence," and decrying racial and sexual hatred, the legitimization of criminal culture, and the cynical promotion of brutality as a path to self-aggrandizement. Focusing on rap, Billboard remained opposed to government censorship, but applauded a turning away from the propagation of the hatefully destructive material currently threatening to overshadow more meaningful segments of the marketplace. Meaningful is key here. To claim any moral authority or enlightened common interest for the profit-minded of pandering to racism and other social evils is obscene. It is an insult to and a corruption of the public trust accorded to the artistic community. New York's inner city broadcasting announced last Thanksgiving, so in 1993, that its stations would not air songs that were, quote, derogatory, profane, or misogynistic, or that promoted violence. KACE in Los Angeles has made a point of, quote, regularly taking out similar editorial positions on air, and other radio stations are currently making a big deal out of their non-playlists. After a number of controversial releases from 2 Live Crew, remember 2 Live Crew, to Ice-T, many labels have in the past 2 years dropped acts, edited releases, and instituted lyric review boards. And while a disconcerting number of today's rappers seem to be spending time in court on criminal charges, The Courtroom in 1954 was a CBS show, Jukebox Jury, in which host Peter Potter judged the music guilty, saying all rhythm and blues records are dirty and as bad for kids as dope. 40 years later, Rep. Collins holds the position that, quote, the record industry is out of control, and if it has to be regulated, so be it.
That is insane about that CBS show, Jukebox Jury. That seems like such a gem. Like, I shouldn't say gem, but like a perfect, like,
encapsulation.
Summary, encapsulation of it all.
Yeah. I just think that, wow.
I also, that quote mentioned earlier about from Billboard, to claim any moral authority or enlightened common interest for the profit-minded act of pandering to racism and other social evils is obscene, is an insult to and a corruption of the public trust accorded to the artistic community.
I mean, not to bring it back to the Sam Smith and Kim Petras of it all, but it really does in many ways literally echo word for word that article that we read in the Daily Beast that was going around about, like, we place our trust in the Recording Academy, and they have defiled the public by shaming us and our sensibilities with their filth.
And it's so interesting because, like, I feel like regardless of what media is being played where, you can obviously make the argument that if this is going to be played to millions of Americans, regardless of age and access, what have you, that there should be some type of regulation. But in a lot of these instances, the existence of this music in itself is what the problem is. It's the degradation of the artistic community, and it thereby suggests or has the premise that art needs to be morally good, educational, helpful, and like an encouragement of like this set of community ideals that is dictated by really whoever is viewing it, whoever's giving the critique in that moment. There's never like it's one thing to maybe say the Bible is the standard, but most of the time it's just this social good, common sense that we really can never pin down.
100%. So why don't we now get into the trial of quite literally, I would say, the decade for 2 Live Crew and their record As Nasty As I Wanna Be.
Yeah.
The lead performer of this group, Luther Campbell, has gone on record afterwards, and we'll get a couple statements from him as well as statements he made at the time. We're getting this particular write-up of the trial and its immediate effects and aftermath from the New York Times. Why don't you take us away? Set the scene for us.
Yeah, New York Times is a good summary, and we also have one from Entertainment Weekly as well that will follow up on it. So, so basically right from the start, again, this is from directly in 1990. The evidence is irrefutable, and Assistant State Attorney Leslie Robinson told the 6-member jury. She was referring to a primary exhibit for the prosecution, a 45-minute audio tape of a performance by the 2 Live Crew at a local nightclub on June 10th. The tape was made by an undercover squad from the Broward County Sheriff's Department. We'll get into that more later as well. There's also going to be a link in the notes to the album itself. You can find on YouTube pretty easily. We'll reference it a lot here, so if you want to take a listen to yourself. The prosecutor added, quote, "You're going to hear graphic descriptions of sexual intercourse, anal intercourse, oral intercourse, references to women being abused and urinated upon, and the group's simulation of deviant sexual acts." In his opening statement, Bruce Rogau, the lead lawyer for the 2 Live Crew, said the group's performance had to be understood in the context of hip-hop, a form of, and again, this is from New York Times at the time, a form of Black popular music that arose in the last few years.
Yeah, just to also, so we have the names of people, the group that is most famous for 2 Live Crew, because it obviously has changed hands a little bit, was Luke Campbell, Fresh Kid, Ice, Mr. Mix, and Brother Marquis are like the group that most people know when they know
at this time especially
2 Live Crew.
So some of the 4-letter words he said, quote, reflect exaggeration, parody, humor, even about delicate subjects like sexual practices. These words, as crude as some people find them, he said, can have artistic value when you have an understanding and when you have them, in fact, decoded. I think that's an interesting thing that will be kind of really the summary of all of this here, in that we're talking about things that obviously at face value, pure objectively, are about maybe acts that are disturbing or harmful or hard to listen to for some viewers. But I like that in this case, we're immediately getting into there's a cultural context here that needs to be decoded. And that's why I think this case is such a great example. So the cases in the course, the latest chapter, a national debate over local obscenity statutes and forms of freedom of expression. Lyrics to many songs on the group's album, As Nasty as They Want to Be, consists almost solely of course accounts of, sexual vendors, lust, what have you. The leader of Two Light Crew, Luther Campbell, and the two band members, Christopher and Mark, both face misdemeanor obscenity charges. If convicted, each faces up to a year in prison and fines up to $1,000. Another member of the group who did not rap that night was not charged, though I think they later turned themselves in. I think we have something on that. Also, at the same time of this case, George Freeman, the owner of a Florida record store, was also convicted 2 weeks before this trial in Broward County of obscenity charges for selling the Two Life Crew album, As Nasty as It Gets.
Just think about that, right? Like, obviously this is in Florida, and I think the legacy of Florida in modern times lends itself to
Florida's understanding at the center of all this.
How this might have happened, especially in a state that is like truly leading the charge, politically speaking.
Yes.
For like some of the absolute worst elements of the American political system at the moment. It just was interesting that really most of this takes place in Florida, because it does feel extremely timely to revisit this.
It really does. Also, so the reason why they're able to convict George Freeman on the selling of the album is because it had been declared, like officially declared obscene by a federal judge. So in this case, the album itself was on trial, and at the band's performance itself, 4 of the songs from the album were on trial.
And remember, the definition of obscene, I'm going to condense it. It's anything that appeals to like the prurient interests and like intentionally incites, I hate to use the word in the definition, but like obscenity in its context.
Yes.
Like that doesn't meet the standards of like obscenity for artistic sake and is just quote unquote like vile and filthy for the sake of being vile, filthy, and disturbing.
Yeah, and I don't need to like quote the lyrics from the song again. You guys can go find a copy of it yourself. But it's basically when someone is declaring they're doing these acts and they're not, at least objectively in a sense, or if you just read the transcript, saying to like not do that or that this is bad. They're saying it's good or they enjoy it, whatever, what have you. It's all interpretation most of the time too.
It's kind of interesting read within the context of like the culture we live in now, where we do have to like append literally
make
every
disclaimers,
single sentence we say of like, oh, I don't literally mean this. I'm talking about this. Or like, oh, like,
or kids, don't do this at home.
Or like, just because this movie depicts sexual violence, I'm not condoning sexual violence. Like,
right.
Like it feels just so prescient.
So similar. Also, interestingly, I like this note that was made in the New York Times piece. So the members of the audience that were at that performance that's on trial now had to be 21 and older to attend. But the spectators on the trial itself had to only be 18. And they have to listen to recordings from that album. Just interesting point there. So according to the standard set by the United States Supreme Court, an artistic effort can be judged obscene, like we just said before, if it appeals primarily to the prurient interest, if it is patently obscene by community standards and lacks serious artistic, literary, or political or scientific merit. So in this case, the Broward County detectives taped the performance on these micro cassette recorders while they were undercover. Apparently, this is my favorite part though. Apparently the cassettes themselves were meant more for like recording conversations or dialogue than music. And in turn, the recording of the music itself was actually so unintelligible and people could not make out the lyrics that the transcripts themselves couldn't be trusted, because if you listened back, you had to be basically completely have faith in the transcripts themselves. to believe what they were saying is true. And even the transcripts at times say things like, quote unquote, graphic lyrics here or girls on stage. You can actually see performances of Two Live Crew around this time as well. They do have women on stage in obviously outfits that would make people like this very angry, I'm sure. So funny enough, the judge basically couldn't actually formally admit the evidence itself. Mr. Rogao told the judge as well, this case turns on a performance and a jury's perception of that performance. No one at the performance had a transcript. A transcript in this case is completely artificial in the process, which is again why it was not admitted into evidence. After more than 5 days of jury selection, the trial opened with a jury of 4 women and 2 men, including a retired sociology professor, a diesel engine mechanic, a retired cook, a retired administrative assistant, a guidance counselor, and the youngest juror, a 26-year-old office clerk with a degree in music who sings in a church choir. As a note, not shocking here, only one of the members of the jury is black. So,
which again is just
so telling, yeah.
And just to be clear, remember that like literally key fact, because it becomes central to like almost the not cultural backlash to this per se, but like
the actual legal ramifications.
The legal ramifications, and also in retrospective is like truly pivotal to everything. So continue.
So I do absolutely love this part right here. So Mr. Rogao, again, they're the lawyer representing Two Live Crew, opens in his argument to the court saying, this is not guitar music. This is not violin music. This is not piano music. This is a serious art, even though it may be different. So during a court recess the day before this article came out, Mr. Campbell said he thought it would take a lot of explanation before the members of the jury understood his music. He says, quote, it's like bringing people from Mars down to explain how we function here on Earth, he told the Times.
And there's so much about this of like people who exist outside of something being put into the role of arbiter of that thing.
Right.
And like we see this with the Supreme Court now, where like throughout its history, even the Supreme Court is like, and with obscenity specifically, right?
Literally.
Because those people, they say that some of them like couldn't even hear. They were so old on the Supreme Court that like they were in their 80s.
Yeah, it's just like that whole thing
judging,
where people have to go through the material separately and provide it to them because they can't even engage in it.
You're in your 80s judging the actions of like 20-year-olds at literally the cutting edge of society.
Of like a new genre being invented live.
Not even just
American
that,
public.
but like society as you know.
Yeah.
Being completely reinvented. White guys who at one point probably 100% supported segregation being the arbiters of a post-segregation world and landscape, artistically speaking, full of sexually, at the time, liberated people who were doing drugs and being free with their sex and like desegregating schools, their lives, workplaces. Women were entering the workforce.
Yeah, these are public officials who are literally a decade and a half or two
the
off
men who were like
the civil rights movement.
The architects of what the civil rights movement was fighting against.
Exactly.
Being put in charge of the world post-civil rights movement. And like you see that as like a microcosm here with not just this jury, but like this judge being like, I literally don't know anything about rap music. I have to have rap music explained to me.
It's wild. But it makes complete sense, honestly. And I think even for us growing up in our time, we had that same feeling when it came to things digital or online or in LGBT spaces as well. So I do love this part here as well, because this will connect back to our part 1 episode. So again, from the New York Times piece, some music critics have dismissed the music of Two Live Crew as mediocre rap. And while most major record chains in Florida have responded to the controversy by pulling the album, as nasty as they want to be, from their shelves, all of the publicity has made the Two Live Crew one of the top-selling rap groups in the country. So again, does this not feel familiar to what we talked about with Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf in part 1 of the series? Like you have music that is being banned or regulated or pulled from the shelves. It's been taught and told by people at large to avoid because of its obscenities. Yet the common response almost every time this happens is people literally want to buy it more than ever. Like they genuinely want to know what's going on, likely because it's being banned as well or because they're being told so.
And you know what's like mind-bogglingly just wild to like just mind-boggling and wild to me specifically, because we forget how literally new the culture we take for granted is.
In what way? Like our access to the way we can access almost anything
not
now.
even just that, but like how culture exists and is sorted.
Yeah.
2 Live Crew, their song "Me So Horny" was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the 7th ever, like number 7 ever on the then newly created Billboard Hot Rap Song charts, which was invented in 1989, the year this album came out. The song on it, "Me So Horny," which is one of the singles, literally was the 7th ever number 1 rap song.
That song was still going around when
for
we were kids
Billboard
in the 90s and 2000s too.
That's the year my parents graduated high school.
Well,
That
so
was
like,
6 years before we were born. That chart got invented.
well, see, it's just like how in last episode too, we talked about the Grammys having to introduce like heavy metal rock into it. And then we have now 5-10 years later, now rap is a new category. And it's like, you can literally see at every standpoint, America, specifically old white America, is like terrified of this entering space.
And you can also,
and they're literally doing legal work to make sure it can't foster.
and just like the legacy of like 80s metal and like rock music into the late 80s, like the legacy of that was so inherently informed by and then baked into the culture by the PMRC and the religious movements within the 80s, right? Of like the moral majority. And you can just see in so many things that are being said about rap, like rap as a genre specifically, maybe not for the first time, but like for the first time in public in these like first few years, 1990, that's only 1 year after that chart got invented by Billboard.
Right.
Like, this is defining the legacy and cultural perception amongst like mass American culture of rap music for decades to come.
Oh, and with the cases we'll get to later as well.
I don't believe this, but I'm just saying of like it being obscene and violent and dark and quote unquote misogynistic, like all of that is informed in part by this trial specifically, and literally the industry having to yet again reshape itself to label explicit records because people were getting arrested for selling this album.
It's insane.
Like jail.
And then listen to this. So literally as of writing this 1990, and this is of January of 1990 itself, sales of that album, As Nasty as They Want to Be, again, federally declared obscene, had apparently peaked at 1.2 million sales.
The most famous pop
That's
musicians.
still a lot of sales now.
I don't think people realize the most famous pop musicians now don't break 1.2 million record sales.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, we
Like,
don't
that's a
buy
big-
music anymore
No, we
anyways,
don't. Yeah.
but I'm like, we don't
It's
even
something like
think-
1,000 streams is one record sale or something insane now. But even then, that's still a lot. And then at the time,
and like half of those are bots.
Yeah.
On like
Well,
a server farm
well, there's also
in
that.
Texas, just like streaming your album Infinity.
So listen to this. So then a Miami lawyer, Jack Thompson, an evangelical Christian, began his campaign against the album by sending copies of the lyrics to Governor Bob Martinez of Florida and the sheriffs of 65 counties in the state.
Wow, a niche like religious figure who gets a penchant for politics and like the national
Where have
platform.
we seen this before?
100% influencing like politics at a state
These
level.
gotta be the worst people in American history, especially. They cause the most
No,
violence
we
and
truly
horror,
are.
honestly.
This whole series, is
Christians
just
who are like, I gotta do something.
Christians
Stop.
who wake up and are like, I'm gonna be the worst person alive today. Like, for Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, I'm gonna just be evil.
I actually have a very big hill to die on. So, and funny enough, since that crusade started in 1990, this piece we're reading came out on October 17th. So only 8 months later, the sales of that album went from 1.2 million to 2 million.
Yeah.
So like, again, your efforts are doing the opposite. And I love this part explicitly real quick. So Mr. Rogow also said the record would have gone away if Jack Thompson had not brought it back. The history of censorship. This is the history of censorship. People will fall over cut glass to get what you tell them they can't have. I live.
And I also think if I'm tying this now to like broader cultural forces at work, not just about pop music. Like, if you've seen online the cultural perception of Sam Smith, who previously they were not well liked, right?
No,
like,
not really. They were pretty mid.
Like,
generally
the
speaking.
religious right's reaction to Sam Smith has made their music more popular and fostered in people a sense of like sympathy and camaraderie with Sam Smith that they didn't previously have. So we're not all bad, right? Like, society itself, I don't think is inherently bad. And I also think with like the trans stuff, which we keep coming back to again and again, like
that's relevant.
Trying to like niche religious political figures who gain national platforms and try to dictate the course of history are everywhere prominent and powerful. That is true. But they also can't make trans people not exist. They're not going to just like make trans people disappear. And
they want to, and they'll try.
As we know, there are more people now in the United States every year that are comfortable and okay with describing themselves as trans and gender nonconforming than literally ever before. And despite that political pushback, it doesn't mean this stuff goes away, right? It doesn't mean that like because of this, no one ever sold a rap album ever again, or like that rap didn't go on to become the most influential music genre and popular music genre of the last 30 years.
I was going to say,
ever.
like, it's still the case.
Yeah. And is now like, because of being co-opted by white artists, many of the hallmarks of rap and R&B more broadly are now almost indistinguishable from your average pop song because of white artists co-opting this in the industry, right? So it didn't stop everyone from profiting on it. And that's what I'm talking about with the tension between like record labels maybe siding with artists for political reasons, but not necessarily having those artists' best interest at heart. And like, I think that's a really interesting, like,
comply as much as you can, but still make those sales.
Yeah.
And still make sure those copies are going right to you.
Dry, 100%.
Because again, at that time especially, you couldn't get 2 million copies without it going right to the record label. This isn't the age of digital yet. So, like we mentioned before, because of this evangelical, Christian, I thought he was a pastor, but I actually don't think he is. He's just a man. Started sending those copies of lyrics to the governor. He was the one, of course, who declared it to be obscene at a federal level. And then because of that, the sheriff of Broward County, Nick Navarro, assigned his undercover deputies to the case to record the 2 live crew concert that we are now discussing in this court case. So this part kills me. I'm sorry. I like these little nuggets of wisdom here. So responding to critics who say fighting crime should take precedence in the sheriff's office, Mr. Navarro said in an interview last week that he was just doing his job. Quote, "It's the law, and I'm the chief law enforcement officer. I'm not anti-rap. Rap is rap, and if you like rap, you can go and fill yourself with rap. I have a rap group in my department. It's called Hands Up. They go and talk to people about the dangers of drugs." Okay, so Atlantic Records has shipped more than 1 million advance orders of the 2 Live Crew new album, Banned in the USA, a rap ode to the First Amendment. Again, like we said, the pendulum swinging, people responding. What do you expect to happen? Mr. Thompson, meanwhile, has begun a lecture tour of about 35 college campuses. Okay, wait, does this not remind you of everything that everyone talks about with cancel culture now? So Mr. Thompson, again, the guy who got this album to be banned, who did all this work to make sure people do not consume this type of material, meanwhile, has begun a lecture tour of about 35 college campuses, including Clemens, Louisiana State, Kent State. Mr. Thompson says he receives $1,000 to $2,000 for an appearance. He says he donates 20% of the fee to private counseling centers for sexually abused women and children.
Courses? Is he selling a book? Is he selling services and goods?
Likely so.
And also making other forms of revenue at these events that aren't that. And also, again, I'm going to make $1,000 and I'm donating 200 of it to a center, right? Like this. And again, it's just like the farce of it all, that like the same reason that so many of these like cancel culture lunatics all sell merch with their faces on it is because it is a grift in many ways, right? Like, let's not pretend that all people with like a religious fervor aren't doing it because they're trying to make a quick buck. Like, let's be real, okay?
That's how it always is. Everything we ever cover on this podcast always ends up being, oh, and look, they're making some money on the
and
side
if you
from
were
these
an
efforts.
upstanding man of God who truly believed
why would
in
you
the
charge for
mission,
this?
why would you not donate all of it? I get you still have to live, but don't you have a church that you collect a tax-free income from?
Yeah, I'm like, donate it to the church. Well, don't do that.
Well, no. I'm just saying, like, why do you need this extra income when you make tax-free income from the church? Because
he's not
exempt status.
No, but he's not a pastor.
Oh,
he's just a
some
Christian
guy.
man. That's what I was trying to say earlier. He's just a man.
He's just some guy. Okay, so this is even worse.
He's not a pastor. He's not a minister.
So you saw a business opportunity and you ran with it.
I hate it.
You were
hate it
like,
so much.
How much do you want to bet that he was like a used car salesman or like the type of man who would own like a jet ski dealership prior to?
He's just a dad who cares about his children.
He is part of the I'm gonna steal this joke from Big Soy Naturals, but the Above Ground Pool Contractor Association of Florida, like.
Oh, absolutely, for Florida. Yeah, that tracks absolutely.
Okay, keep going.
So this is kind of the end of the piece here, but this is interesting because this is something that I think we're all very familiar with the discourse of rap music still to this day. So Mr. Thompson maintained that the band is, of course, promoting pornography, advocating violence against women. He says, quote, "These guys are out promoting the idea that women are there for nothing but to satisfy men's desires. This stuff makes it more likely that women will be abused." In recent weeks, Mr. Thompson had also begun protesting the music of two new rap groups, Ghetto Boys and Too Short. He runs campaigns from his 2-bedroom home in Coral Gables. With the help of a compact disc player, he transcribes song lyrics he finds obscene. He then sends them by facsimile machine to record companies, reporters, law enforcement officials, and politicians. He's just really spending all day just listening to all this music he hates, just so he can send it out like a cop to report them on to all these different agencies.
Literally, can
United
you
States.
Imagine? Like, that's a
So
fetish.
depressing.
There's like a fetish there.
That's what it kind of feels like. I'm like, why do you care this much? Like, how could you truly care this much?
It's money.
Because the people in law enforcement don't really seem to care that much until they're told to do so.
Like we talked about with the moral majority being like originally masterminded by a guy who was incensed by segregation and then found a bunch of political like avenues to take to continue making money off of your racist private schools. Like, it makes sense that a lot of these like religious types, and as someone who comes from the evangelical background, which is in part what has inspired this series so heavily, I understand religious fervor and I understand the like chaos and ecstasy of a church, right? Like the mindset of this like mass organism that you become a part of that all like moves in tandem in either a state of like religious worship and ecstasy, or in many ways you will see like mob mentalities, right? And you can see this in a lot of like fringe religious groups. So I don't want to prescribe this to like a lot of the people we see now and a lot of the people we saw in the 80s and 90s, but like it does make sense why so many of the major religious figures in retrospective are all sex criminals, white collar criminals, are people who are like doing tax fraud and like doing things that diametrically go against the teachings of their religion.
So
because
common.
I don't want to ascribe all religious people to like inherently doing what they do, believing in Jesus or whatever that religion may be, out of like evil or like moral impurity, right? Because then we're no better than they are judging everyone else in society. But like the people who sit at the apex of these organizations,
who like make sure they're in those positions of power,
who ensure their own longevity and riches and wealth off the backs of people who like, I do think genuinely want the world to be better.
Of course.
They're like taking the reins of these like mobs of like religiously incensed individuals and directing them places for their personal gain. I think that that's like a fair thing to say.
It does feel like a martyr mentality as well, too. Like dedicating your life to this cause.
I'm saying that for like people like below that on the stratosphere, right? Like, and I'm not, again, not making excuses for people who believe evil things, say evil things, are horrible, racist, transphobic, all that, right? Like, you can be in the church and not be a transphobe or like actively wish death on trans people. I'm just saying that like if you are born in that environment and then like had it drilled into you every single day by some guy who's doing tax fraud on his spreadsheets with the millions of dollars he makes tax-free off of your parents' like last penny every year.
It's really an American pastime at this point. Like,
you know what I mean? Like,
throw a nickel, find a documentary about someone doing this in every church, every organization.
And these people often don't have to work hard to whip people up because like you see with rap music, or like you saw with the PMRC, or like you saw in the 50s when we discussed the backlash to rhythm and blues before it was coined as R&B more broadly, like, you're naturally playing on people's predisposition towards prejudice in like an inherently prejudiced society, right? So you're not really having to like go too far.
Do much work at all.
No, you're just like
you're just fanning the flames.
You're fanning the flames of fear and racial violence. I want to quickly touch on I want to get my time right. So this was shortly before.
Yeah, I think just a few months before.
It just has a few quotes from Mr. Campbell, like Luke Campbell in it that I want to touch on because like, I think it can be hard when you look at history and you see the worst elements. You're like, wow, everything was bad. But I think what we've been trying to say throughout the series, is that there are people who like don't agree.
Well, in the end, I've been saying this with the series, and in the end, these are the people we do like tout as like the heroes or like the leaders or like the pillars.
Even if their names are like obscured in history, right? Yeah. Like Luke Campbell is not like somebody that you can just go up to anybody and be like, do you know Luke Campbell?
But they probably do know like Me So Horny or like other music as well.
I mean, I wouldn't say maybe people our age.
Yeah.
Unless you're like aficionados.
Yeah.
Because like we didn't live through this, right?
That's
like
true.
This was 5 years before we were born.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, but I want to just say, because I do think again it's important to note that not everyone agreed. And the people also had good opinions at the time too.
Absolutely.
In an interview, this is from rap singer Rags to Riches Through Music. It's a New York Times interview with Luke Campbell in June 1990 amid the trial. It says, in an interview at his new offices in a Black Miami neighborhood, Luke Campbell said today that he is a victim of racism and of a narrow-minded local judiciary that he views as out of touch with Black people and with younger Americans of all races who have bought 1.7 million copies of his album. To, quote, get to the record store to pull my record off the shelf, he said, the Broward police had to drive by stores selling X-rated videos, clubs with X-rated live sex shows, and stores selling magazines like Penthouse and others. But they just singled out my record, produced by a Black group with their own independent Black company. Now, if that's not racism, what is it? And again, I think that there's also a very interesting note there of it's an independent record company, that it's like not produced by a major label, and it's sold all this copies.
Yeah, and it's popular because it's popular.
All this money as like a Black-owned independent record label.
Put on like national television by like the
where
big executives.
Like it's going into like Black people's wallets that was singled out. I think that there's like something to be said.
But they're right as
that.
well. Like we have all these X-rated videos, like sex shops and like all these other quote unquote obscene activities that you have to be 21 older to attend. And just like their concert, you also had to be 21 or older to listen to the music be played live. So it's like, why is the line constantly drawn around us? And we definitely know why now, especially. And
so
they knew
he
at the time as well.
Sheriff Nick Navarro of Broward County, who has led the crackdown on the rap album, strongly denies the charge of racism. This part is... Buckle up. He said in a telephone interview that he sought to have the record banned because he believes it is so sexually explicit that it clearly violates laws on obscenity. When asked why he had not similarly cracked down on a sexually explicit record by the white comedian Andrew Dice Clay, Mr. Navarro said he had not received complaints about it and was not aware of its contents.
I mean, nothing more needs to be said there.
Okay, so we're also going to stay in June for a little bit. This is from June 29th, 1990. This is a little bit more scene setting for the trial, as well as a little bit more of the history of what's going on. So in an unprecedented legal decision, quote, a federal judge in Florida ruled on June 6th that As Nasty as They Want to Be, the controversial sexually explicit rap album by Miami-based Two Live Crew, violated community obscenity laws. Within days, 3 members of the band and a local record store owner had been arrested for their involvement in the performance and sale of the record, which had been bought by nearly 2 million people, as we said. So the decisions provoked a wave of headlines, TV talk shows, and debates about music censorship, which again is important to note that like the country didn't just like roll over and die about this. Like this incensed people, it caused conversation. It was like the talk of the town for like a long time.
The discourse was discoursing.
It says within the past year, more than a dozen states introduced record labeling bills that required large stickers on any album containing questionable lyrics, such as possible offenses as, in the language of a Missouri bill, quote, interesting that they start with this.
I wonder where that comes from.
Sodomy, incest, bestiality, sadomasochism, adultery. Okay, so I just... like
cheating, gay
guys,
fucking.
1990.
Bestiality, though.
1990.
Who is singing about bestiality?
This is all grouped under the same category of
That's
like,
how you know it comes
badness.
from like the Christian evangelical
in
background.
1990, you guys.
Well, wasn't sodomy outlawed in most states until recently as well?
Anal, incest, bestiality, and sadomasochism, and then cheating on your spouse are all the same thing. I'm sorry. It's just like we have to laugh about it.
You do have to laugh.
Now because it is shocking. Like that was 35 years ago. And like, wait, was it 35 years ago?
33.
33?
33. 1990? Yeah. 33.
I don't want to think about the passage of time.
Let's not.
So then in May, the Recording Industry Association of America announced that starting next month, stickers would be printed with the words parental advisory, explicit lyrics, which we are all aware of
very
now.
Familiar with. Mm-hmm.
Which would begin appearing nationwide on select albums. Record companies will decide which albums receive a label, and no legal violations will be involved in their sale. With that announcement, the music censorship movement appeared to lose steam everywhere but in Florida. There, the Two Live Crew has been at the center of an anti-porn campaign by Governor Bob Martinez, who called As Nasty as I Want to Be, quote, audio pornography, and Miami attorney Jack Thompson since the release of the album last year. So we talked a lot about this a little bit with the New York Times, but just to say again, the record store clerk in Sarasota, Florida, who was arrested for selling it to an 11-year-old girl, had the charges dropped, but the message to the record business was clear. In response to that, and through other attempts by the local police, Luther Campbell brought a civil suit against Broward County Sheriff Nick Navarro for prohibiting the sales of the albums. And on June 6th, a 62-page decision, the U.S. District Court Judge Jose Gonzalez ruled that the album's lyrics were legally obscene, which is what we talked about a little bit with that piece. Now, the prosecution, and this is the important part here, the prosecution of Two Live Crew's album comes at a time when profanity-laden albums by Guns N' Roses and Andrew Dice Clay were easily available, and it led to charges of racism. Sheriff Navarro has repeatedly denied the accusation, saying he's simply carrying out the law, but Campbell isn't convinced. And here, once again, he has that quote that gets quoted in the New York Times, which I just read. They singled out my record, produced by a black group with their own independent black company. If that's not racism, what is it? Robin Blumner, executive director of the Florida chapter of the ACLU, which will aid in the legal counsel representing Two Live Crew and Freeman, said, quote, "This is a relatively powerless group. They don't have the resources and power that CBS might, so they're an easy target."
See, what did we just say earlier as well about if this was promoted by like the big labels, it'd be a very different story.
Yes. Now, in hindsight, I think this is very interesting.
Oh, I died when I found this info.
Died. No, okay, so you know me, I'm nosy. I'm like, Broward County Police Chief in the news, 90% sure somewhere in Miami has his obituary, right? Because like there's nothing local small towns love more than printing police chief obituaries.
Oh, absolutely,
like
yeah.
it is a pastime across the
sentinel
nation.
moment.
Okay. I got this from the South Florida Sun-Sentinel in September 2011. Quote, obituary, former Broward Sheriff Nick Navarro died today. So this, I did get a sick sense of satisfaction from this, knowing that he died of, I think, cancer, but also what else he was known for is just...
It's pretty great.
It's not even...
Well, it's great in contrast.
It's great in contrast, but no, it's not even just that, but it's like... So, of course, this is what he was
like,
up
what
to.
did we just say about the people who make themselves pillars of the community?
In his
and what
time
they
as
actually should
sheriff, he catapulted himself into a celebrity, helped along by, quote, cops filmed in Broward with Sheriff Navarro and his deputies as the star of season 1.
I cannot believe they were like the headliner for Cops, the show.
Guys, Cops.
Horrible.
Like, the show Cops.
Horrible.
Okay, it gets better. As the agency now puts it, quote, the department's exploits were frequently documented by the national news media. Now, this is wild. Among the exploits, Sheriff Navarro pitched a tent and used it to house inmates from an overcrowded jail. He was threatened with contempt of court, and he was threatened with a contempt of court charge for that. Another oft-remembered move, manufacturing crack cocaine in the crime lab to use in drug stings.
Like, the cop is making crack for a
like, no, and it's not even just that, but it's like, so by most people, he's remembered as like a criminal cop because like when the jails were being literally stuffed beyond capacity with poor people, black people, immigrants, etc. in Broward County specifically, due to racism propagated by his own agency, rather than reevaluate literally any of their life choices, he just goes, just fucking put a tent in the yard. Put him in there.
So like, evil. It's so fucking evil.
But also I'm just like, what fucking hell country do we live in? And then also the fact that in America specifically, you can write the words, the cops were manufacturing drugs to use in drug stings.
I'm shocked they put that in. They're like, oh, it's just kind of crazy that he did that, right?
Well,
I'm like, mama.
Guys, does no one ever think like, the cops had the drugs that they were accusing other people of having and the means to manufacture them? That's not weird at all. That certainly doesn't lead to any questions about drug stings or who gets arrested or where you might find a gram.
It was only the 90s.
Where you might find a gram of such and such substance in someone's glove compartment or back pocket during an arrest.
No, this got to be one of the worst cops like that we know of, at least with this much documentation, mama. Like Cops, the show, making crack, likely using it to frame people during the biggest
100%.
epidemic. Obviously hates black people and wants them put in prison for literally just making music. Vile.
And all the obituaries you read about him besides this one are like,
loving member community.
He was a loving member, a loving father. He's credited with like bringing the Broward County Police Department to the forefront of the national consciousness and, you know, allowing the agency to expand greatly and gain prestige for their various operations. And it's like, dude, like he was putting prisoners in tents and manufacturing crack cocaine.
Menace. Like, typical day in Florida, I'm sure.
Okay, so
We also have the 30 years later.
30 years later.
Yeah.
Do you want to get a little bit into this?
Yeah,
because I just read that other piece.
Yeah, this is real quick. So this is from October of 2020, getting this from Variety. Two live crews, Obscenity trial, remembered by Luther Campbell and Doug Morris 30 years later. So, and this will be a great segment to what we have to kind of end this episode with in terms of like modern examples of rap music being used to prosecute. So Atlantic Records head Doug Morris has become incensed when he saw TV coverage of the group being arrested in June after a performance at Club Futura in Hollywood, Florida. Quote, being arrested for selling music, says Morris, who is now 81 and not only still in the game, but running the 12-tone label, but basking in the success of one of the biggest hits I've ever had, Joji's Run. He responded to Two Live Crew's controversy by signing Campbell to Atlantic, agreeing to distribute both Nasty and the new lead time single for July 4th, banned in the USA, a parody song of the Two Live Crew, received permission from Bruce Springsteen himself to use in the mid-80s anthem. He says, quote, I'm proud of that. It was a matter of principle for me, defending freedom of speech in the First Amendment. This embodied that concept more than anything I'd seen. True, some of the lyrics were hard to defend to my wife and some of my friends. People would look at me like my hair was on fire. Luke also says, the case scene was extremely far-reaching for hip-hop. The case is one that allows artists to say what they want on their records. I didn't have to challenge the ruling in federal court, but I was prepared to go to jail for my rights. When I look back, I realized the far-reaching importance of it. But at the time, we were somewhat blackballed by both mainstream and hip-hop industry. If I hadn't made the appeal, it wouldn't have set a precedent and become case law. So you actually forgot to mention this earlier, but the case actually went on for another 2 years through an appeal, and then went to the Supreme Court, which ended up appealing the ruling, thankfully. So I know we have stuff from here as well regarding Gavin Newsom's new
initiative.
Yeah, a new initiative, which I truly did not know anything
No,
about. So this was kind of a gag, like
flew under the radar.
and this literally ties everything we just talked about all the way together.
Oh yeah, because you thought this was the 90s?
No,
Let's talk
mama.
about 2022.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with a piece by Complex, September 2022. Meek Mill, Too Short, E40, YG, and more joined Gavin Newsom for signing of California's rap lyrics bill. So this is, like I said, from last September. California Governor Gavin Newsom has officially signed AB 2799, landmark legislation that protects an artist's right to freedom of expression. The Democratic lawmaker passed the first of its kind bill Friday afternoon, more than a month after it was unanimously approved by the state Senate. Known as the Decriminalizing Artistic Expression Act, the law restricts the use of rap lyrics as evidence in California courts. New York failed to pass similar legislation earlier this year, which was seen as a major blow to First Amendment rights. Newsom said during the call for the bill, quote, artists of all kind should be able to create without fear of unfair prejudicial prosecution. California's culture and entertainment industry set trends around the world, and it's fitting that our state is taking a nation-leading role to protect creative expression and ensure that artists are not criminalized under biased policies. Now, it is genuinely wild that 32 years later, we finally get around to maybe thinking about the effects of criminalizing people for the lyrics that they have in their songs. Like literally what happened in 1990. Okay, continuing. Participants of the bill included major members of the Black Music Action Coalition and the Songwriters of North America, as well as music industry leaders like Recording Academy's CEO Harvey Mason Jr., Reform Alliance's Jessica Jackson, and former Def Jam's record president Kevin Lillies. Quote, this is from Dina LaPolte, entertainment attorney and co-founder of Sona. For too long, prosecutors in California have used rap lyrics as a convenient way to inject racial bias and confusion into the criminal justice process. This legislation sets up important guardrails that will help hold court prosecutors accountable and prevent them from criminalizing Black and brown artistic expression. Friday's signing included various rappers as well as members of the artist community: Meek Mill, Killer Mike, Ty Dolla $ign, YG, Tyga, Too Short, and E40. One source told Complex that Too Short gave an impassioned speech on how his generation was targeted by prosecutors who used lyrics against them. He also expressed gratitude in the next generation of California artists that will be afforded creative freedom without the fear of their art being used against them. E40 echoed Too Short's comments, saying he was a proud Californian and was pleased to see his home state lead the way with this legislation. It was authored by Assemblyman Reginald Jones Sawyer, who's a Democrat from Los Angeles, and AB 2799 also applies to other forms of creative expression, including visual, performance art, films, literature, and poetry, and it goes into effect literally last month, January 2023. So,
and it's wild. Like, I can't believe actually how recently that happened, and like you said, completely flew on the radar. But I remember there's also this other story you found that I also did not know anything about that was incredibly upsetting. Should we get into it?
Yeah, so let's talk about this from The Guardian, because this was all coming about in tandem with an increase in reporting at the national level of people being prosecuted for their lyrics, which is not new, but it was becoming something of like a national focus for artists because of this reporting and the push to like get these bills passed in various states. So why don't you continue?
Yeah. So again, we're getting this from The Guardian. Title of the article is "When Rap Lyrics Are Used Against You in Court, They Silenced Me for 21 Years." This is from September 2022. So in the year 2000, McKinley Mac Phipps Jr. was a 22-year-old aspiring rap star when he was arrested for murder. So a 19-year-old had been shot at Slidell, Louisiana, a club where Phipps was due to perform, and police quickly zeroed in on the artist as the suspect. A man who was working security at the venue confessed that he had killed the teenager, but prosecutors still pushed forward a trial against Phipps. This is where it gets just so fucked up.
It's super fucked up.
So fucked up. So authorities had no physical evidence or weapon tying Phipps to the murder, but they had something else to bring to court: his rap lyrics. So from the song "Murder, Murder, Kill, Kill," "Pull the Trigger, Put a Bullet in Your Head," those are some of the lyrics that the defendant chooses to rap when he performs, the prosecutor told an all-white jury, according to a recent NPR report. Again, speaking of the jury itself, of course, being all white, them being presented these lyrics out of context, not understanding the meaning.
Just the like idea that this person there was literally no physical evidence. Someone else confessed to the crime, and he had literally just zero evidence linking him to this. And they were like, well, he rapped about it, so he's obviously the murderer.
Yeah, he rapped about shooting somebody, so thereby he must have committed this crime. So Phipps was convicted and given a 30-year sentence based almost entirely off these lyrics, and of course a jury that then agreed that those lyrics were enough to convict. So again, this is from September. So they're talking about basically at the time, California lawmakers are now passing new regulations meant to restrict such use of rap lyrics as evidence in criminal court, the first of its kind in the United States. Experts say that although the impact for the new policy will be narrow, it is a step forward in putting guardrails on a prosecutorial practice that all too often has been used to criminalize the artistic expression of young Black and Latino men. Researchers have tracked more than 500 reported cases of prosecutors using rap music as evidence against defendants in the last 30 years, though that number is probably a significant undercount. The practice started to surge in the 2000s when authorities began to rely on social media in cases against amateur rappers, and when law enforcement, quote-unquote, gang units escalated their crackdowns. This is from Eric Nielsen, a University of Richmond professor and co-author of the book Rap on Trial. The lyrics are typically cited to suggest gang affiliation, proof of crimes and intent, or demonstrate a rapper's quote-unquote violent characteristics or threats. Jack Lerner, University of California Irvine law professor and an expert on the subject, said that the tactic is used across the U.S., pointing to a 2004 manual of the American Prosecutors Research Institute, which encouraged the use of lyrics in search warrants and trials to, quote, invade and exploit the defendant's true personality and present him as, quote, criminal wearing a do-rag and throwing a gang sign to contrast the, quote, nicely tailored altar boy in the courtroom. Again, these are quotes from the 2004 manual from the American Prosecutors Research Institute. specifically targeting the lyrics and the aesthetics used in rap videos and media content to contrast the presentation they have when they are in court. Although there are rare cases where words or music videos may be linked to a specific criminal offense, experts say research shows their use in court has often worked to prejudice the jurors against young men of color. Multiple studies have found that associating defendants with rap music creates a strong negative bias in jurors, and that people are significantly more likely to perceive lyrics as violent, offensive, threatening, dangerous, and literal if they are from rap compared to any other genre.
That came up a lot in the studies I was reading while putting together this episode, and just like going back through the annals of history. And it is just like, again, I mean, it's not shocking, but it's just shocking to read confronted.
It's
like,
just really
so
upsetting
like
how often it is used in criminal cases, and that it is something that is like bona fide put into practice and put into writing. It's not even just like a bias people have that's maybe not spoken or directly acknowledged, but it's actually like the opposite. It's like objectively put into writing and used as a way to get desired results. So another researcher that was being interviewed for this piece said, as soon as you introduce rap, you're compromising the defense's ability to have a fair trial due to these biases. Researchers have also found widespread examples of prosecutors taking lyrics out of context, presenting them in inaccurate and misleading ways, treating fictional lines as facts or confessions, and using music to expand charges and secure convictions in lengthy sentences. This is also from Newsom, University of Richmond professor, who said prosecutors talk to each other and see this as a very effective tactic, and that it is unlikely to be reversed on appeal. So why wouldn't you do this if your goal is to lock people up, whether they're guilty or not? He also wrote about a 2013 California murder trial in which prosecutors had a 14-year-old tried them as an adult, claiming lyrics in his notebook were, quote, autobiographical journals, including lyrics from other artists, which were erroneously attributed to him. So you literally have a 14-year-old kid who is writing lyrics to music they want to write or practice, also using lyrics from other artists. And in this 2013 trial, which is not very long ago, 10 years back, they tried him as an adult because they believed that what he wrote was considered autobiographical material. It is like beyond, honestly. It's like completely beyond. So in the case of Mac Phipps, prosecutors presented the artist's lyrics as evidence, as if he was a criminal, despite the overwhelming evidence that he was innocent, like the witnesses and the people confessing to the murder itself. Witnesses who had testified against him ended up later signing affidavits saying police had coerced them to lie, including by threatening them with arrest. Last year, Louisiana governor granted Phipps clemency, which did not overturn his conviction, but allowed him to come home after 21 years. Phipps, who's now 45, said it was so surreal. About prosecutors reciting his lyrics in court. Hip hop was my way of dealing with city life. It was my livelihood. It was how I took care of my family. To have my art used against me in court, I felt like I had been smacked in the face by the very thing I love so much. The song that prosecutors cited, again, Murder, Murder, Kill, Kill, was co-written by other artists, quote, as a battle rap and play on words of a military cadence, like when soldiers are marching, he explained. It was basically declaring my lyrical dominance over other rappers. It's a very common theme in this type of genre. He says, quote, I had no criminal record, no prior instances of violence in my past, so all they could turn to from their perspective was the song lyrics. And for them, it was effective in actually convicting someone who was completely innocent. Phipps was also questioned whether members of the group, such as the Killers or the Chicks, who had penned lyrics like Earl Had to Die, would have their works used against them in court. And he says, what most rappers say is either straight fiction or highly exaggerated. We're artists. We don't have to paint reality with art. You can paint the world as you'd like to see it. Art gives us an opportunity to escape from reality. And when that escape mechanism is criminalized, that's an atrocity. I'm still trying to find my voice after being silenced for 21 years. It's so upsetting. Like, it's really fucking horrifying. And that's the whole thing with, I think, to bring it back to what you were saying earlier about the trans stuff that people have been reporting on constantly, where people think they can just say this stuff as if they're trying to protect the children, protect morality, discourage this type of music. But in reality, a lot of the stuff that people say, even as opinion or as this moral crusade, can quite literally be turned into actual law, actual legal practice, and put people in prison and get them killed even. Like people
Yeah.
are put in prison and people get hurt or they lose their lives to completely biased, no understanding. I'm sorry, I'm just like completely baffled as I think about it. Like, it's just so insane to think that in a 2013 case, a 14-year-old was tried because they had lyrics written in a journal that made them be deemed violent. Like, that's the stacking effect of everything we've been talking about this whole time coming into practice, where people are basically fearful of certain people of the community because of these notions or biases or racial.
Yeah. I also want to talk about a little bit the RICO case against Young Thug and the so-called YSL gang in Atlanta.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is another thing where lyrics are being used. So this is a piece in OkayPlayer in which how Young Thug's RICO charges set up a new precedent for rap lyrics used as evidence. And this is one of the things that's happening in the backdrop of the national conversation about this. And one of the, not necessarily the impetus for it, but certainly one of the things that like starts this conversation. So it lists a bunch of different lyrics, including, quote, "I had to break in the safe and I didn't leave a trace," or "I escaped every one of the licks because I was supposed to be rich. I don't care nothing about no cop. I'm just telling you how it is." These are all lyrics, as OkayPlayer says, that are being used by prosecutors in Georgia as, quote, "an overt act in furtherance of a conspiracy in a 56-count grand jury indictment against the artist and 27 others who have been accused of being an alleged blood-affiliated and Atlanta-based gang that shares a name with Young Thug's record label, Young Stoner Life Records, or YSL Records." So it's an 88-page indictment. And it reveals this RICO charge that they got slapped with, RICO charges, excuse me, which are like, truly, if you look at how many charges there are, it's genuinely shocking. Like the fact that it is literally like every single gun in the legal system is pointed at
Jesus
Young
Christ.
Thug and these people at the moment. It says that it's 88 pages and it shows that for the past 9 years, prosecutors in Fulton County have spent all their time scouring his music, lyrics, and social media output of him and other artists in an attempt to categorize the group as both a gang and participants in criminal activity by saying basically like, well, they're rapping about crime, so obviously this is part of our case against them.
Yep.
It's used as evidence, like these lyrics,
Yep.
in the trial against them. There's a book that gets quoted here that I did read a little bit of. It's from 2019. It's called Rap on Trial. I do suggest if you want to know more about this, like definitely
the
it
book we
sounds like a
mentioned
book.
earlier. Yeah.
We've mentioned it a few times. I read a little bit of it. He says that the author of it says that through the research, they uncovered dozens of instances of prosecutors submitting rap lyrics as evidence in criminal trials dating back to the late 1980s, with obviously, like we said, the 2 Live Crew stuff happening. And that in most cases, they found that using these lyrics as evidence led to successful convictions of Black artists. So like in almost all the
It's like
cases,
exclusively Black artists as well.
yeah, in
that
all
are
the
in these
cases where rap lyrics were used as evidence, those people were found guilty. Now, so Young Thug is being accused of being one of the founding members of YSL. He's charged with conspiracy to violate the Georgia criminal racketeering law, with individual charges including murder, attempted robbery, aggravated assault with a weapon, and the prosecutors charged 28 defendants with conspiracy to violate the Racketeering, Influenced in Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, which is where you get RICO charges from. They say that there's like 180 acts that aided the collective conspiracy, including, quote, instances of alleged members getting YSL tattoos, wearing clothing and accessories that say slime, and a small trove of Thug lyrics that prosecutors are likening to gang propaganda. So
God,
like,
but it's almost like the legal version of like the demonic lyrics that we hear about with Sam Smith and other artists.
Yeah.
It's like, this conjures the devil, this conjures violence, this conjures misogyny,
Now,
this conjures whatever.
I was reading about this in part because I was reading another complex piece that I was going to get into just a little bit here. T.I., Bun B, and Ari Melber all talked at ComplexCon in November about this, and we're talking about how these lyrics being used as evidence in Young Thug's RICO case are like part of this larger push against rap lyrics as evident. Like, not that those lyrics are being used because prosecutors want to push back, but that like they're in part now pushing back because there is a documented history of racism in the U.S. legal justice system that uses these lyrics as a form of prosecution. So I'm getting this from Complex. This was at ComplexCon. It's just a little bit of quotes to kind of set more of the scene. Quote, although it has yet to be passed, H.R. 8531 or the Restoring Artistic Protection Act of 2022, the RAP Act, was introduced on the federal level in July by Hank Johnson, a Democrat in Georgia, and Jamal Bowman, a Democrat in New York. The RAP Act, similar to the one passed on the state level in California, which we discussed, would, quote, according to the bill, amend the federal rules of evidence to limit the accessibility of evidence of a defendant's creative or artistic expression against such defendants in a criminal proceeding and for other purposes. It says that Young Thug and a host of other prominent artists have promoted the Black Art Petition, which launched by 300 Entertainment's Kevin Liles and Atlantic Records CEO Julie Greenwald. Quote, in courtrooms across America, Black creativity and artistry is being criminalized, Liles and Greenwald said in a statement. With increasing and troubling frequency, prosecutors are attempting to use rap lyrics as confessions. Since it launched, the petition has garnered over 65,000 signatures on change.org, and they say, quote, I always use my music as a form of artistic expression, and now I see that Black artists and rappers don't have that. You know, freedom, Thug said during a message that was played during Hot 97's Summer Jam. Everyone, please sign the Protect Black Art petition and keep praying for us. I love you all. Now, I'm going to read, just to close out, the actual bill that was introduced. It hasn't been voted on yet. I think it still might be in subcommittee. It's not really clear. I went on the actual Senate website to read.
Oh, it didn't go live in January?
No. This is the one at the federal level.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is HR 8531, the Restoring Artistic Protections Act, or the RAP Act.
Yeah.
So there's been no movement on it since it was introduced. It says to, quote, amend the federal rules of evidence to limit the admissibility of evidence of a defendant's creative or artistic expression against such defendants in a criminal proceeding for other purposes. So the section 1 says, limitation on admissibility of defendant's creative or artistic expression. In general, Article 4 of the Federal Rules of Evidence is amended by adding at the end the following, quote, limitation on admissibility of defendant's creative or artistic expression. Creative and artistic expressions inadmissible except as provided in subsection B. Evidence of a defendant's creative or artistic expression, whether original or derivative, is not admissible against such defendant in a criminal case. With exception, however, a court may admit evidence described in subsection A if the government, in a hearing conducted outside the hearing of the jury, proves by clear and convincing evidence, if the expression is original, that defendant intended a literal meaning rather than a figurative or fictional meaning, or if the expression is derivative, that the defendant intended to adopt the literal meaning of the expression as the defendant's own thought or statement. So what it's saying here, bypassing all the legal jargonry of it all, is that the only exceptions to this rule are defined as if it was an original work, meaning you didn't say, like, I'm just saying this for example, like a tweet that you send out, right? Like, let's use that as an example. It's not talking about tweets, it's talking about lyrics, but just to make it for context, like say you rap about robbing a bank. It's saying that if that's your original lyrics, original song, that the government outside the jury, meaning they can't present this as evidence until they have cleared these exceptions and standards for exceptions, that outside the jury, before the jury gets to hear anything about these lyrics, the government can prove that you literally meant to rob a bank when you said that. Like that they have clear and honest evidence that you were literally going to rob a bank. And if it wasn't your original work and you were saying like derivative, meaning you're referencing, quoting, or sampling, that you also likewise meant to adopt that as your own expression and then conduct that as like a literal thing you were going to do.
Terrifying.
No, it's a good thing.
Oh, sorry. I thought you meant it the other way around.
No, I'm saying that the bill is saying that those are the only two exceptions to what can actually be used as evidence, lyrically speaking.
Oh, I see.
So like lyrics are banned as evidence except when the government can, outside of the jury room, meaning like outside of where the jury can hear about it in chambers, prove to the court that you literally meant to rob a bank, or when you quoted someone about robbing a bank, that you adopted that as your own expression and then meant to carry it out.
I thought in the essence of like a tweet, for example, that really was all they needed to know.
No. So like, so like using Young Thug, for example, that lyric about I cracked open the safe or I got away from all the cops, that he wasn't just storytelling or bragging or, you know, like, it was like a lyric power move kind of bullshit, like that he literally was evading the police and that he literally there was a safe that he then wrote that song and then cracked open, or
you actually
cracked
need, like,
open prior to writing that song
concept,
and they need proof of that they can demonstrate before the jury gets to hear the evidence. Because part of, I think, what the language of that is supposed to entail, and I'm no legal scholar, I've just had to report on a lot of trials, is that oftentimes prosecutors will admit evidence that necessarily might not clear certain courtroom standards as like a way to influence the jury, even if they know the evidence is going to be like rolled back, or that the government will say that's not accessible. Like, jury, please don't consider that when making your decision, which is something that happens all the time. You know, a prosecutor will bring something forth and then they'll have it stricken from the record, so to speak, but the jury has already heard it, you know? And you can say like not to take that into account, but like say you heard,
but they drop something very obviously either triggering or
say you heard
bias.
Yeah, like say you heard, oh, we found a bloody gun 10 miles away from the murder, and then the court rules that that bloody gun was used for something else, or wasn't like an actual bloody gun, and the court says that's not evidence. Strike that from the record. Like, jury, when making your decision about this murder, don't count for the bloody gun 10 miles away. How many people can honestly say, I'm saying just putting yourself in the mindset of the average juror that isn't like galaxy brain like us, that people wouldn't be influenced and aren't constantly influenced by that, right?
I mean, this is why they specifically choose jury to not have any black people in it when prosecuting a black man. Like, it's the same. So, I mean, it's all like, it is always been a design to get the desired outcome.
So that language about having to prove it outside of the jury is, I think, part of what they're trying to combat by that. So then also that they say then that, so this is, again, speaking of the exceptions. So we talked about if the expression is original or derivative. So those are just the first two hurdles to clearing the exception. The second then is, so it meets one of those two things, right? Say that they said you literally meant to rob a bank. Then for number two, that the creative expression refers to the specific facts of the crime alleged. So if you're going to use lyrics saying, say, Young Thug cracked open a safe at a bank, is the crime you're accusing Young Thug of literally cracking that safe and robbing that bank? If it's not, then that lyric is not applicable. It doesn't pass the exception rule. So you can't just use the like general scene setting of his lyrics to prosecute him. You have to use lyrics that specifically refer to this exact thing.
Because what the mindset of a lot of these people have and why they have to
is we're trying to paint someone as violent or a criminal.
It's because they want to use lyrics to be like, well, look, they talk about murder, thereby they must be involved. They must actually have interest in this. And so
if that lyric isn't referring to the specific crime, this bill is saying you're not allowed to use
I'm interested to see how this will actually be implemented or followed, because...
Well, it hasn't
Yeah, of course.
And so there's more,
but
though.
if it does, then I'm interested.
There's more, though. There's rarely just 2 hurdles to an exception like this. So then number 3, that the expression is relevant to an issue of fact that is disputed, and 4, that the expression has distinct probative value not provided by other admissible evidence. Because studies show that specifically white juries have negative connotations concerning rap music, and that introducing rap music into a courtroom in studies has shown across the board an increase among white juries of feelings of negativity towards the defendant in those trials in which their rap music was being played or rap music was introduced as evidence. So they're also saying that, like, say that we're going to use the lyric about robbing the bank, the cracking the safe. They're saying, do you have other evidence that is better suited for that? And if so, you have to use that, not the lyrics.
Interesting.
So that, like, if you have, say, like, photographic evidence of him literally in the bank turning the dials on the safe, that is the evidence to go with, not the lyrics.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's interesting, just like as like a person who does have like an interest in like the law specifically, just because I talk about it a lot with celebrities and on this podcast, just to like read how these bills get made in their initial drafts. Now, this isn't how necessarily it'll get implemented. Republicans
precedence ends up taking hold.
Republicans are at play, and it's an election year, so like we're talking on the federal level, right? Like things can get passed in California, but like we're talking on federal level.
Yeah.
We know what that's a whole different
most
ballpark.
Like serious crimes go to the federal courts, not the state courts either.
So then there's also rulings on the record. So in any hearing under subsection B, the court shall make its ruling on the record and shall include its findings of fact essential to its ruling. So what they're talking about there is if this is being used as evidence and say it passes or doesn't pass, that the court has to rule on the record that they like ruled on this lyric's permissibility.
Well, yeah, because that's what we saw earlier where they're like, this is the only evidence we have as lyric. And it's like, I can't believe that was even allowed to be.
And so the court has to admit on the record that like,
but now you have to really
this
prove
as that we're like now using this as like a matter of fact.
And if you're going to, it needs to be like as precise as possible.
So if the court admits any evidence described in subsection A pursuant to the exceptions under subsection B, the court shall, quote, ensure that the expression is redacted in a manner to limit evidence presented to the jury to that which is specifically accepted. So they're saying you cleared the exceptions. You're now going to present it to the jury. You're not going to play the whole song. You have to play exactly what is specifically been accepted, because if the rest of the song isn't about that, it's probably not going to pass this exception. And then finally, definition. In this section, the term creative or artistic expression means the expression or application of creativity or imagination in the production or arrangement of forms, sounds, words, movements, or symbols, including music, dance, performance art, visual art, poetry, literature, film, and other such objects of media. So this is more of like a broad,
I was about to say, like, now we're getting to the meat.
This is more of a broad free speech act, but like specifically through the prism of rap lyrics being used to unfairly prosecute Black people in America, that like they're also broadening this to say like you can't show someone's film about like they make violent movies. You can't use that as evidence to say they're a violent person. And I think why I wanted to include this as like something lawmakers are thinking about on the federal level is online, and something we've talked about with this a lot more recently is that like there are so many people online, and it just happened today about Sam Levinson and The Weeknd's new show on HBO, The Idol.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this whole Rolling Stone report. It's its own thing, and we'll talk about it on the bonus episode next week because it is interesting. And I do have some gossip about it that I'll tell you after the podcast because I can't say it on record. Is that like a lot of it is about how like mismanaged it is and how Sam Levinson isn't a good showrunner, and The Weeknd like took out allegedly the feminist parts of this show to make it more about like his like violent sexual fantasies and like about him specifically.
The moral panic
it stars
continues.
Lily Rose Depp, etc. And like in reaction to this, so many people were like literally pull quotes from the Rolling Stone article are like,
oh, they're ridiculous.
Crew members were shocked at the graphic nature of the movie and that like, you think Euphoria is bad? This is worse.
Oh, they explicitly said like it was levels above what the worst you've seen on Euphoria.
And like, okay, this is my other thing.
I was like, but Euphoria's okay.
To get to all of that, you had to bypass the fact that a woman was ousted and a show rewritten to be about Sam Levinson and The Weeknd's violent sexual fantasies. So you bypass that part about how they literally spent $70 million on this.
Which is mind-boggling.
And you also had to bypass the part where it said Levinson was not seen on set, allegedly, until the day they had to film Lily Rose Depp's first sex scene. You bypassed all that to fix your eyes on the part where there's violent sexual fantasies worse than anything you've seen on Euphoria. And there's so many comments from people being like, I can't believe they're allowed to make shows about this. I can't believe that like we're going to have a violent, dark show. And
because we have to watch it because we're glued into this chair, eyes like taped open.
And I think it's interesting that this comes out the day we record this.
Right.
I'm not comparing Sam Levinson or The Weeknd to say members of Two Live Crew.
Yeah, no.
Like not comparing.
Definitely not. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is like the idea that our art and like artistic expression is a one-to-one marker of so-called moral purity of the person creating it is so deeply damaging and is literally being used as we speak to prosecute people unjustly and send literally innocent people to prison for decades.
Yeah.
Because of like, in this case we read about in The Guardian, a rap lyric was used to send a man to jail, prison, who literally had no connection to the murder.
It should have been 30 years except for the fact that they finally got around to going, hey, look, they like signed affidavits saying police coerced them and someone else admitted to the crime and we only judged him off the lyric. Like, it would have been 30 years.
Just like think about that, right?
Even
like
just
that,
one person going
This
under
is something that already happens. Who unfairly gets the most like prosecution and actual backlash for the content of their art, right? That it's not Sam Levinson who's like tortured by society for making violent movies. And the likelihood of Sam Levinson going to jail is very low for whatever kind of content he puts out on Euphoria. Do I think he deserves jail?
Maybe.
Yes. No, but
for other reasons.
But I'm just saying like that normalizing that mindset allows people to completely obscure the reality of the America that we actually live in. That's something that was literally so damaging 33 years ago is still so omnipresent in culture and is now central to like one of the largest RICO cases against an artist in US legal history against Young Thug. Like, you read this indictment and literally everything people are saying is like, this is a historic indictment, that like, this is an unprecedented level of charges, that this is like unprecedented in scope. And like by normalizing an attitude where we are looking at violent, challenging, explicit, quote unquote, obscene art and then judging their creators based on that art, drawing one-to-one parallels between the actions of fictional characters or music, dance, film, books, etc., and then applying that to literal people either producing it or reading it, right? That like you're just as bad as the character in a book about a serial murderer for reading the book about the serial murder. Like, you're just as bad as the serial murder. You're condoning serial murder.
And all we have seen in the history is that all that leads us to literally the wrong person being convicted. So quite literally, the people who actually are committing these heinous crimes are not being charged.
And so when you see,
they're not loud about their activities.
When you see like generally white people on the internet making these accusations, it only once again goes right back into what I'm saying about obscuring the actual reality of the consequences of that mindset. And, you know, like I said, there's been no forward progress on this bill, HB 8531. I couldn't find any recent reports saying like where it is in subcommittee, if it's going to pass, like what people are saying about it.
Honestly, it likely won't, more they think about it.
You know, in California, obviously I didn't read the California bill. I'd be interested to see how much the language echoes that. But just be mindful of that when you participate in these discussions. It goes right also back to what I said about Gabriel Galimberti's art with the Balenciaga stuff, you know? And like, just what I was thinking about with Sex and the City this morning. Like, again, the fact that like, where do we draw the line when we prosecute art? And where do we draw the line when we start ascribing real world values to fictional things? Like, it is such a slippery slope. And I feel like all of it is so loaded because the very worst people in society have co-opted this conversation that we can't even have it normally like we do just between the two of us.
I have to remember that as we read these history, that like the good people end up winning in a lot of instances, though a lot of people, literally as we read, hundreds if not thousands have gone to jail for these acts that cannot be forgotten. But I have to hope that the discourse that we're talking about today,
I don't even want to say that like, yeah, I don't even want to say that like just the heroes win. I don't want to. I
know it's not
that
like
feels
that.
simplistic.
No,
but I think more that it is hopeful to think about these things.
Yeah,
and it is hopeful to remember that these things that we are being confronted with in new ways, certainly through the Twitter discourse and internet, like we said in the very first episode, are not new to society, right? Like, we're not the first people to ever be confronted by a mob of people. Well, I guess that's what I mean.
Like, we're going back through and we're seeing at the time, literally at the time, people, there's a lot of people, a lot of resistance to it.
And exactly, that's what I'm saying.
And I hope that people listening, much like I think Joe and I do it in our own spaces, when we see people we know falling into these like kind of traps, these like sociological or like philosophical traps that people are promoting, truly to talk to them and like engage with them and really interrogate like why people feel this way and why they think it's so important, because that's a lot of power actually we have when we start to do that. Yeah. Because this is something we can all relate to and engage in.
Yeah. And I want to also say, as we close out the episode, about last week's episode, like we received a genuinely unprecedented amount of outreach about that episode, which was super heartwarming, obviously, because we got really personal in it. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who shared that episode, talked about it with your friends. From this series and last week's episode, like we have just been on a more serious note. And as we close this out, obviously there will be a lot of just like serious conversations to grapple with. Like, when we did the Balenciaga series, there's not like much laughter and like a mob of people accusing Balenciaga of like satanic child sacrifice.
That's how I feel as we end this episode. I'm like, just like, I know we're talking about the hope, but like truly feeling hopeless. Like, it's truly upsetting.
But I want people to just know that like, we're not always a super serious podcast. Right. You can go to our Patreon to get the fun stuff too, more consistently. And we want to thank everyone who's also been supportive of our new schedule. So for those of you who don't know, we release Patreon Monday after recording our Patreon episode, so it'll come sometime in the afternoon. And then we obviously drop these episodes on Thursdays. And this just kind of helps us, like, what we used to do before was like record this and then immediately record the bonus episode or do the bonus episode before
a vibe
this.
Shift unlike no
other.
Like,
and also like
or vice versa, and it was still rough.
Recording like 5-hour blocks, like we're like morning radio host presenters, like doing the traffic.
We're I mean, depending on how the edit goes, we're like getting close to almost 2 hours for this episode. The idea of then recording another hour of like actually fun, like kind of brainless content would be maddening.
So it just has been helpful for us, and it's been nice to see people be more supportive. And because of it, we're being way more consistent, like hitting those 4 episode a month, at least 4 episode a month limits for the bonus episodes. So thank you to everyone who supports us. Like, I can't tell you enough that you are literally paying my bills right now. So like, I genuinely appreciate it. Otherwise I would literally be on the streets because I just need the support, and you guys help make the show happen. So,
and we're not like those big shows, mama. Like, that Patreon has saved multiple people from pretty severe circumstances. Like,
I mean, it got me out of my really terrible marriage. So I just want to say thank you again for all the support. We really appreciate it. And literally the outreach after last week's episode was really affirming and nice. And leave 5 stars on our iTunes.
Yeah, please.
That's all I've got.
Please do. It really
You want to get
helps
the
us.
fuck out of here?
Let's get the fuck out of here.
I have this kombucha to drink.
Oh my God, it's hot and warm now.
No, it's not. It's cold. It's 46
still
degrees outside.
Cold.
Yes.
Not in this apartment. It's not 46
No, I've been
degrees.
learning I can't. Okay, by the way, really quick. In some of the reviews for this podcast, people will be
I know which
like,
one you're
why
talking
is
about."
Joan burping? It's not burping, okay?
It
I
was.
it was sometimes.
It was
'cause
burping before?
I would rail
Don't lie.
sparkling water.
Yeah.
But like,
You haven't done that in a bit, though.
I have a condition where I talk really fast and don't take breaths. So like the air in my throat, like it becomes like a solid mass in my throat where I'm like, I need to breathe. So sometimes I am sorry. I try my best, but I am not perfect. And we have a lot to talk about. So that's all. I just wanted to call you out, all you people.
Why are you looking at me like that?
No, they still leave 5 stars, so I'm not upset. I'm not upset.
Yeah, as long as you leave 5 stars, you can say whatever the hell
Yeah,
you
you
want.
can say
be
whatever the
nasty
fuck
to
you
us,
want.
but just leave us 5 stars.
Get rid of those like 10 one-star review bombs after the Balenciaga episode. So stupid.
Right. No,
Can you imagine being like so incensed? You're like, 1 star. You're illegitimizing child sacrifice.
Oh, yeah,
Which
not
is
like those like one paragraph reviews are like, don't you care about the children? I'm like, so you didn't listen to any of this.
No, you didn't listen. You don't.
The SEO
You
is
don't care.
so real, you guys. They will come after us for anything. All right.
3, 2,
2,
1.
1. Good.
You've been listening to Eating for Free, which is written and hosted by myself, Joan Summers, and Matthew Lawson, and produced by Ashlyn Thomas and myself, with music from our friend Pluto. For more information about this episode and our show, go to eatingforfree.com. And if you want weekly bonus episodes, go to patreon.com/eatingforfree, which helps support this show and keep it going. We've also got merch at eatingforfree.com/merch.